I'm Scuffle, and today we're going to talk about the cards and how to draft them. So I use my own system for ratings. Specifically, I give everything a scale from 1 to 10 with the goal of helping you figure out where that card will go into your deck and how you should play it. A 1 is a card that you should never play. A 2 is a card that you should try not to play. 3 is filler. You're going to have a lot of 3s. Don't worry too much. 4 is a card that's above average. 5 is a card that's quite strong. 6 is a card you will always play in a given color or archetype. 7 is a reason to play that color or archetype. 8 is a card that you need to make fit into your deck. 9 is a card that you should always play. And 10 is a card that wins the game. 10 is very rare, there's very few of them. In addition, my system has a floor, which is the worst a card will be. Usually, like if you play it without any other context, without knowing what else is going to be there, that is the floor of the card. A ceiling is the best that a card can be. And an effort is the difficulty required to bridge that gap. So if there's something that's very, thank you, Liz. There's something that's really a strong build around, maybe I'll give it a high grade. Maybe I think it's too difficult to build that deck. So none means that it just goes into your deck, period. Low means that it's not a ton of effort, it goes into most decks. Medium means you're going to have some amount of play skill to play that card, or some amount of difficulty when building your deck to make it fit. And high usually is something like a sideboard card, something with a very high requirement to play it, something that's really hard to use. So we're on to the Wilds of Eldraine, and we're going to first talk about the mechanic in general and an overview of the set. So we're right here, and let's now we can see the chat. How's the chat look? Chat looks good. Great. A little bit bigger and scoop. All right, so adventures you may recognize from the last Eldraine. It is a fantastic mechanic. It is the idea that these creatures, it's always a creature, are going on an adventure, and that adventure has some sort of impact on the world. So here we have Frolicking Familiar. It's a 3-mana 2/2 with basic prowess, not quite prowess. And you can pay a red and send it on an adventure to deal 1 damage to any target. There are 31 common and uncommon adventure cards in the set, 10 multicolored adventures. So in the original Eldraine, every single adventure was monocolored. If a creature was red, then it would have a red adventure. That's not always the case here, which means that some adventure creatures are multicolored. We'll talk about how to play those and where they fit into your deck. There are 4 adventures in each of white and black, 7 adventures in 8 blue adventures, 8 red adventures, and then there are only 2 cards that care whether or not something is an adventure, and they are both blue. So in the last set, we had a 1-mana 1/1 that would draw a card in green whenever an adventure came into play, and then an artifact that would duplicate an event. Here, in Wilds of Eldraine, blue cares more about adventures, and that's generally true also because blue cares about instant, which means that adventures are a way for blue to cram more instants and sorceries into you. There is a bonus in this set. It's called the Enchanting Tales. There are 63 total bonus cards. Every single pack has one of these bonus cards, and they're all enchantments. There's 18 of them at uncommon, and then the rest are rares and mythics. And there are more rares and mythics, but 2 out of 3 of all of them will have an uncommon, which means that they appear at the rate of regular uncommon. So when we go over the cards for this set review, I will be doing uncommon Enchanting Tales with their given color, because they'll show up often enough to be relevant to that color. And I'll be doing the rares and mythic rares at a much, on their own after the other rares, because you will see a given mythic rare Enchanting Tale at a much lower rate than any other mythic rare in the set, and at a slightly lower rate for regular rare. But the mythic rare Enchanting Tales are unlikely to make a major impact on limited. I mean, they will, because they're very strong. But the uncommon Enchanting Tales are going to be very important how this set plays. Hey, Kuro. All right. So I will be answering questions at the end of each one. So I'm not going to talk about every mechanics, just the ones that are tougher or interesting to play with. So up first we have rolls. I love rolls. It's so cool. So rolls are their own enchantment token type. Uh, a card will say it makes a roll. A roll does something. So the royal roll is enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has ward 1. The young hero roll is whenever this creature attacks, if its toughness is 3 or less, put a +1/+1 or +1/+1 counter on it. So these are enchantment rolls relevant to an enchantment-centric set. And it matters what each roll does, and it matters that they're tokens, and it's important that everything can only have one roll. You can't be a royal young hero. Young hero, a royal. There is a commander only roll, dog, and I don't know what it is. I'm not gonna worry. But all of the rolls are all 6 of these rolls. I think there's a 7th commander only roll. There are 6 rolls that matter to our limited environment. There are 5 common and uncommons that make the monster roll, which is +1/+1 example. There are 4 common and uncommons that make the royal roll, which is +1/+1 in ward 1. There are 3 commons and uncommons that make the sorcerer roll, which is whenever this creature attacks, you scry 1. There are 8 with the wicked roll, which there's a lot of very wicked things in Eldraine. And wicked is +1/+1, and when this roll dies, not the creature, when the roll goes away, the opponent loses 1 life. 5 young heroes. Young hero is interesting because it's the only one, it's the first one. The first 4 rolls all give +1/+1. Young hero roll requires an attack, which is inherently offensive until you get the counter down. And then there's the curse roll. And the curse roll is like, it's removal. A curse creature is a 1/1. So there's 3 cards that make a curse roll that you put on your opponent's cards, and then 1 card that makes a curse roll that comes in with the curse. We'll talk about that card today. There are 29 total cards that make rolls, so when we evaluate the cards that care about enchantments coming into play, or dying, or being sacrificed, we need to keep in mind that 29 extra cards also make rolls. If you replace a wicked roll with a wicked roll, it does work. Your opponent loses a life. And, oh, yes, Tutor, that is correct. Your opponent does lose a life. And you care about, like, your cards that say the trigger when you sacrifice a roll. Matt, care about that. Rolls are really cool. I love the way the roll mechanic was designed. I think it's fantastic and makes it feel like it is a unique thing that does. So where there are a lot of other little mechanics, they have the signpost uncommons. We'll talk about most of the mechanics when we talk about their signpost uncommons, which is going to be next. But there are so many tokens. There are food tokens, there are rat tokens, there are treasures, there are humans, there are fairies, there are birds, there are all sorts of rare tokens, and then of course the rolls, and there's 6 different rolls. They're just at common. You need to know what 11 different tokens do. None of them are that complex, but they do matter a lot to the set. So there's some new mechanics. We have Celebration, which is over here. Gallant Pie Wielder has an effect, in this case double strike, as long as 2 or more permanents enter the battlefield under your turn. That includes rolls. That means that making a roll is very likely to trigger Gallant Pie Wielder. It includes Sky Beast Tracker. So whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, which is the Simic mechanic, create a food token. That means that if I have an instant that costs 5 mana, and I make a food token at instance, I can trigger the Gallant Pie Wielder. Or if I rat out after 1 target creature gets -1/-1 and make a rat token at instant speed, that can trigger the Gallant Pie Wielder. Or if I need to make something to bargain at instance. All the tokens are very interlaced, and they care a lot for the different effects that this has. And the last new mechanic is bargain. You can sacrifice an artifact, enchantment, or token. You can sacrifice a token creature. You can't sacrifice a Sky Beast Tracker to bargain. Though it does take a little bit of work. There might be a $10 token in the set Tyrant, but I haven't seen all the rares. Alright. Stats! There are, oh, thank you very much, Lion, for all. There are 106 creatures in this set. There are also 32 enchantments, plus the 29 rolls. That is very high. There are 4 cards that kill, this is common and uncommon. There are 4 cards that kill enchantments, very relevant. 18 creatures have flying, which is always good to know about because it lets you value your flyers. 5 creatures have reach, which is just defensive flying. There are 16 cards that we can treat as combat tricks. That's a little bit high, and that's because there are more shrinking removal, and there are more There's bargain cards and adventures. So there's more combat tricks than usual. There are 13 instant permanents. That means cards with flash. That means cards that make rolls. That means cards that make food. That means cards that make rats. That is relevant to cards like Celebration. So Celebration is an interesting mechanic a lot because your opponent might be able to make a food at instant speed. Turn it on. There are 5 sources of colorless fixing. That means that at land and artifact, there are 5 ways to fix your mana. And that we'll talk about those more as we get to them. But it's important for this set because there's a lot of essentially free splashes, a lot like we saw in March of the Mission. All right, but there are 30 creatures with 1 toughness, 39 creatures with 2 toughness, 43 creatures with 3 toughness, 28 creatures with 4 toughness, 6 creatures with 5 toughness, 6 with 6 toughness, 1 with 7 toughness, and there are not any creatures with more than 7 toughness in. But a lot of creatures grow. You should assume that your opponent can give their creature +1/+1 at instant speed if they're leaving mana up because of how many different cards make rolls. One of the reasons there are so many combat tricks in this set is because the number of cards that can make a roll at instant speed give your opponent's creature +1/+1. So just be careful when you're spending a spell, because if your opponent gives their creature a strong roll, then probably your spell. Oh, thank you, Haiku. All right. Removal. There are 3 cards that deal 1 damage to a creature. That's very important. There's a lot of 1 toughness creatures. There's a give everything -1/-1. There's a deal 1 damage, draw a card, make a treasure. And there's the adventure that pings on the otter. That kills 17% of the creatures in the set, in addition to all of the little tokens. It's not usually worth spending a whole card to kill a token, but none of the 1 damage removal spells make you do. There are 3 cards that deal 2 damage. That kills 43% of that. There are 2 cards that deal 3 damage. That kills 76% of creatures. There's 1 card that deals 4 damage. That is 93% of all creatures in the set. And then there are 2 different cards that deal 5 damage. One gives -5, -4. There's 1 card that both gives -3, -3, and -5, -. That -5, -5 kills 96% of all creatures. Other removal, we've got 3 auras, 3 cards that make that curse, the cursed roll, that makes it a 1/1. 14 of them are instant. There are 6 things that tap, which is very relevant. It's the glorious mechanic. We'll talk about it soon. There are 2 spells that bounce. There's 1 tuck, which means top or bottom of their library. There are 7 creatures that double as removal or are some amount of removal of their own. There are 5 rare removal spells, and you may hear me talk a lot in other sets about how much removal at rare makes for a good set. All right. Last, before we get to the cards, this is a puzzle set. This is a high synergy set. When you draft, you need to be looking for the other pieces of your puzzle. So I have here 4 blue cards. We've already talked about the Frolicking Familiar. We talked a little bit about Storyteller Picks. Whenever you cast an adventure spell, draw a card. So, all of these blue cards are very strong in this set. Blue does different things based on what you pair it with. In general, these 4 blue cards you want in your deck in combinations of 2. Frolicking Familiar and Storyteller Pixie very well together. Have an adventure and a card that cares about adventures. But Blue-Black Fairies wants to play the game on your opponent. And Blue-White Tappers wants to spend its mana on its own turn to tap down a creature. But if you're spending mana on your own turn to get an attack in, it's going to be very hard to hold up mana to counter your opponent's spell on their turn. You are putting out hatching plans on your turn and trying to bargain it away. That's a very strong thing you do. Bargain lets you sacrifice an enchantment. But it is difficult to both bargain away the hatching plans and tap down your opponent's creature and have adventure creatures. So it's a little bit like Cube, which I'm glad that we have Cube right now. Because your cards, even your strongest cards, will not always function in a vacuum. It's very dense as a set, but you will be able to commit to stuff. If you first pick a Storyteller Pixie, down here, you want to really prioritize your adventures for the rest of the draft. If you first pick an Ice Rot Sentry, the blue-white mechanic is tapping your opponent's creatures. You want to keep getting things that let you tap your opponent's creatures. Just that in mind. When you're drafting, try and figure out, do I need to sacrifice any of my own permanents? Or do I need to pick up cards that do I need to pick up permanents to sacrifice? Do I need my permanents to come in right away, or can I do it on my opponent's turn? When do you want to spend your mana? Now to proactively, or can I do things reactively? What are your card types and how do they interact? Do I have enough, do I have enough instants? Do I have enough sorceries? And then am I going to get outground? Am I going to get out aggroed? All of these questions are going to be incredibly helpful. All right, so up first, while we look at the cards, we're going to be talking about the Signpost uncommons. They are all uncommons, and they are all incredibly powerful. But Storyteller Pixie isn't in the main set. Okay, well, I just learned Storyteller Pixie isn't in the main set. Thank you for letting me know. I do appreciate that. I really thought it was. There is another card. That's annoying that it's not, actually, because I really liked it and was excited to play with it. The Jumpstart card. All right, we're going to use this Chancellor of Tales in exactly the same way. Pretend that every thing I just said, I use Chancellor of Tales instead. Is this card not in the main set either? No, it is in the main set. It's 45. Okay. I'm sorry. I did have that thing. I appreciate you letting me know, Thane. I do have a few other cards where that's the case. Chancellor of Tales. Whenever you cast an adventure spell, copy it, choose new targets for the copy. Everything I said just applies, but we have Chancellor of Tales instead of, which copies the adventure spell instead of drawing you a card for the event. I actually found that I caught that in white and green, which I was planning to do today. All right, great. Thank you, Thane. I really appreciate it. All right, up next, we're doing the Signpost Uncommons. These are great for showing us what that color pair wants to do, and they're going to be fairly powerful. They have high ratings because they're a good card. Thank you, March. All right, Ash Party Crasher. So this is a cool card. I don't like it as much as the other Celebration. But as a 2-mana 2/2, that attacks as a 3/3. So a 2-mana 2/2 with haste is fine. And Celebration counts itself, which is nice for a haste creature. So if I have Ash Party Crasher in play, and then I just play another 2-drop on turn 4, it attacks as a 3 with haste, which is pretty cool. However, as opposed to the other one, so there's like a 2-mana, that's a huge rainbow out there. There's a 2-mana 3/1 with Celebration. It has +0/+. Ash triggers on attack. That means that I don't get to hold up the threat of activation for Ash. I don't get to attack with Ash Party Crasher, and then if my opponent blocks, I make a food and instant speed and trigger Celebration. So that is a knock against it. However, it's still a very aggressive and strong threat. Aggro is difficult in this format because food as a mechanic. There's a lot of incident. However, it's solid. My other problem with Ash is a lot of the red-white cards that trigger Celebration give it the Young Hero role. But the Young Hero role only triggers one time on Ash, because after the second one, he is a 4/4. So I gave it a 5. A 5 with a floor of 3. That floor is if you are not built around putting Celebration. That's just a base. With a ceiling of 6 and medium effort. You have to put effort into that Celebration. But it's manageable. All right, up next, we have a real banger. Greta, Sweet Tooth Scourge. 3-mana 3/3 that makes a food would be good enough by itself. A 3-mana 3/3 with an extra rectangle is just a solid card. However, she lets you turn every single food you have during the whole game into a fresh card. So I gave her an 8, which is very high. One of the higher grades. Usually I give rares 8. But I think she's pretty busted. I meant to give her a 7. I'm going to do that because 6/8 with an average of 7. Because she's low effort. A lot of these cards, you like go back to Ash, you have to put a work into triggering your Celebration. But Greta is self-sustaining. Like, you would pay 5 mana for a 3/3 that draws a card. You would pay 4 mana for a 4/4. You would pay 3 mana for a 3/3 that gains you life. Every mode that Greta brings to the table is very strong. But black-green is food anyway, and turning all of your food into cards is so strong. And her modes are always strong because if you need the life, then you take the life. And if you have life to spare, then you can start eating the food. Just so much work. Premier, very strong. Johann, Apprentice Sorcerer. Pretty good. You need to put a lot of work into having enough instant sorceries to play it. It would be a little higher in other sets. It's just that a lot of the instants and sorceries are very timing dependent. You need to. If this were in other sets, you would just be like, okay, I will lightning bolt off the top, I will shock off the top. In this one, it's like, well, I need something to bargain away. I need to trigger my celebration. So it is more work than usual. But you can cast adventures off the top of your library with Johann. Send them up, like, even if you're just pinging with the otter here, this frolicking, you're happy. I gave it a 5 with a floor of 4, and it's usually going to play a little bit higher. And if you really build your deck right, then you can get it up to a 7. It's very strong. Because in a lot of time in the blue-red decks, in this blue-red style deck, you'll have maybe 10 instants and sorceries, and then 10 creatures, or 11 and 11, and that can you risk drawing all of your instants before you draw any of your creatures. But in this set specifically, so many of the instant sorceries you'll be running with Johann are creatures themselves because they have adventure. It bumps it up a few points. Diva, Stalked by Nightmares. Red-white is Celebration, aggro. Black-green is Food. Blue-red is Spells. Black-white is Enchantress. Specifically, Enchantments Dying. So a 4-mana 2/2 with Menace is okay, but not good. A 4-mana 2/2 with Menace that picks up a creature or enchantment is great. And a creature that grows with Menace every time an enchantment dies is very strong. So I gave her a 6 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 8, but she's a lot more work to build with than the last few. However, rolls are very good with Neva because you can put an aura on, like you can give her the royal roll or the young hero roll. Attack, put a counter on her, then give her a wicked roll, sacrifice the young hero, put another counter on her, and scry 1. Just a lot of value on a real threat, and it's a real threat that has already drawn you a relevant card by returning a card from your green. Yeah, 6, 4, 8 with a little bit of effort in terms of how you have to build your deck and when you have to play her. Definitely worth it. Obira, Dreaming Duelist. Very cool. Really aggressive Fairy Lord. One of the problems I have with red-white as an aggressive deck is I think blue-black is just a better aggressive deck than red-white. A 2-mana 2/2 Flash Flying would be good enough. But there are so many ways to make fairy tokens. There are so many ways to just control the game and play the game on your opponent's turn that such an efficient attacker is likely to deal 8 points of damage if your opponent doesn't kill her right away. Very strong card. I like that she's always asleep. I gave her a 6 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 8. Medium effort because you really do want the fairy deck specific. It's hard to be blue-black without being the fairy deck. Very strong card. Ruby, Daring Tracker. 2 mana. So a 2-mana mana dork is good enough often. You have to be red-green for her. But like if you are this is a set where mana is valuable. Your cards are valuable and maybe a little bit more expensive. Adventures tend to be worth 2 cards, and a lot of the cards you'll play will be. So ramping your mana for 2 mana is really good, but since she has haste, you can on turn 4, if you have a 3-drop, and play her and the 3-drop. And then a lot of times a dork is bad in the late. Like something that makes mana is bad in the late game because it doesn't attack well. It's like having her to land. Well, Ruby attacks quite well. Early game, she's a 2-mana mana dork that accelerates you. Mid game, she's essentially a free threat. Late game, she attacks for 3 damage. And even if you draw her off the top, like it's not when another creature with power 4 or greater comes into play, it's as long as you have one. So if you top deck her in the late game, play her and attack for 3 surprise damage. Red-green is also feels like a better aggressive deck. Jirai of Numbing Depths is an actual 8. Like I'm not going to drop her down a point. So good. Yeah, so the white-blue mechanic is taps and stuns. You tap an untapped creature. It doesn't have to be tapped, stun it, and then she draws a card. So at her worst, This is a 4-mana 2/3 stun a creature, draw a card. At her best, this is a 4-mana 2/3 stun a creature, draw a card, and draw an additional 2 cards every turn because your turn and once on their turn. And there are lots of ways for you to stun on your turn, draw a card, and so you're proactively stunning, and then also defensively tapping their creatures in order to stop their attack, which also removes a block from. I'm gonna raise her effort up to a medium. Raising her effort up to a medium, shoot. Because you do have to build around it, but she's worth building around. Also dropping her ceiling to an 8. But very strong. Olias, thank you for the follow. Ninja, thank you for the subscription. Alright. Shirai is really good in this set. Worth first picking, worth splashing. There are not. She might be best uncommon. They're better uncommon. You can make an argument for Greta in the right deck, but like, I will go blue-white for Shirai. And if I am blue or black and I get past a Shirai, I will pivot into the Shirai deck. If in pack 2 or at the end of pack 1. If I open a Shirai and I'm one of those colors, I will probably just still splash her. She's very good. She's in a proactive, aggressive deck. You need to remove blockers. That in a more defensive deck, you need to stay alive. She's done something, and in a really controlling deck, she draws you a card on a relevant body. Very little ridiculous. All right, Sir Armont the Redeemer. This is the Selesnya Signpost uncommon. It cares about enchanting creatures. That's what green-white wants to do. At its worst, this is a 5-mana 4/4. Usually it's going to be a 5-mana for 6/6 worth of power because you give something else trample. Give something else +1/+1. It's so nice, Kuro. You give something else +1/+1. But ideally, so the roll that it gives +2/+2, and then if Sir Armont dies, then takes away the +1/+1, but she leaves that monster roll behind. So even if she plays into a removal spell, you still have +1/+1 and trample. Ideally, you play this and she adds 6 power to the board right away. Give something a monster roll and +1/+1. Have a few other things that are wielding rolls. Very strong in the Selesnya deck. Good card to splash. Monster rolls in general, we'll talk about over the course of this set review, are strong on a lot of different creatures. A lot of different situations. Big death touch creatures really benefit from. Totentan, Swarm Piper. This guy gets a buff because I'm pretty sure Black-Red Rats is the best deck. The best deck in this format is either Black-Red Rats, which requires a lot of uncommon. There's not a lot of the commons for that deck. The only reason that it's not an automatic best deck because the rats at common are often weak. The blue-white is the other contender for best deck, but a lot of the cards that don't matter for blue-white are weak. But Totentan's Swarm Piper at its worst is a 2-mana 2/3 that dies into a rat. I'm gonna lower the floor a little bit. Yeah, because if you are not, I'm gonna lower it even more. Because you need other rats. This card doesn't work without other rats. If you just let it die and it makes a rat, that's bad. But if you have one other creature die and it makes one other rat, well, your opponent can't block those rats anymore. What you'll have in a lot of situations with your rat deck is you'll have one big creature holding the ground, a 4/4 or a 5/5. Then you have 6 rats. Your opponent has 2 2/2s. And you can't attack with your 6 rats because your opponent's 2/2s will just block 2 rats. But one Totentan's Swarm Piper, that doesn't matter how many 2/2s your opponent has, they're not going to be able to block. Threat of activation on Totentan way stronger than the fact that it actually gives rats death touch. And then sometimes you'll actually give rats death touch and your opponent will feature for a rat, and very sad. Card is good. That mainly because of what I found it. I gave it a 7 average with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 8. Usually gonna play up near that ceiling. Alright, Troyan Gutsy Explorer. I gave this one a 5, but it's got a ceiling as high as, I'm gonna lower the ceiling actually to 7. Because that's what, if you can jump this card, if you can use Troyan Gutsy Explorer to play a 6-mana spell on turn 4, then you will probably win the game. It's just the 6-mana spells are really strong in this. And in a normal set, this would be a lower score because the 6-mana spells are a risk, right? So if I have a deck with 3 Troyan Gutsy Explorers, no 4-drops, no 5-drops, and a whole bunch of 6-mana spells, then I risk drawing all those 6-mana spells without Troyan, or I risk them killing Troyan and me not having a turn 4 play. However, a lot of the best 6 and 7-mana spells in this format are adventures, which means that if they kill Troyan, I can still just cast my adventures at it as a creature. So Troyan has a higher ceiling here than in other sets because it's a lower risk card. You can build your deck with a lower risk. However, that takes a fair amount of skill and card evaluation over the course of the draft. I gave it a ceiling of 7 with a floor of 3 and an average score of 5, but it's work both in how you draft and how you play with it. Just don't assume that Troyan is free. Looting is nice. It's a good bonus in this set. Also, this is the golden. All right, that is it for the multicolored cards. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to the artifact? Whether it be about mechanics, stats, or cards. Kind of works for Eldraine. All right, up next we have the artifacts. The artifacts are pretty cool. So up first is Candy Trail. Comes into play in Scries. And you can sacrifice it to gain 3 life and draw a card. Life gain is relevant. No one part of this card is enough, but playing this on turn 1 lets you 2 is nice. Scrying 2 feels like about somewhere between half a card and a whole card, especially in the late game. Being able to pick up the card in the late game that you see on top that you strong. Life gain is relevant. Having this to sacrifice in a pinch to bargain is fine, although you'd rather draw a card. And if you it triggers celebration for so the great question, Kuro. So the tapping in this set is at uncommon, and it's really the payoffs are at uncommon. So like we have Shirai of Numbing Depths, and a little bit we will talk about the very good white payoffs. But there's really only 3 payoffs. However, there are a lot of good common ways to tap things. The payoffs are Ice Rot Sentry, Shirai, Ice Rot Sentry, and then there's a white enchantment that we will talk about today, and they're good payoffs. But like, there's some good commons that tap. There's a lot of opportunities to tap your opponent. But there's really 5 cards you have to look out for. We'll cover 4 of them today. I like Candy Trail, so I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3 and a ceiling of 4. And that's because it's an artifact. It works with a lot of other of sets mechanics, and I'm pretty happy to draft it most of the time. Collector's Vault. So this one I came back into 3 times over the course of this set review. It's expensive, so 2 mana for an artifact that lets you pay 2 to loot is a lot. But making a treasure at instant speed means you get 1 of that mana refunded right away. So if you need to collect his vault and play something, then you can just sacrifice a treasure. There are a lot of cards that care about you having treasures. This lets you trigger Celebration at instant speed. It gives you treasures for bargain. There is a specific white card that lets you sell treasures to people. This has a place in this. I actually had it like a 1, then a 2, then a 3, and then I bumped the ceiling from a 3 to a 4 to a 5. You don't want to take this card early, but if you have a reason to trigger Celebration or need more sources of bargain, Collector's Vault is a solid card. One of the few Pokemon that I will take a break to from a set review. I like Lilligant. Okay, Ariet's Tempting Apple. this is the first time we've had a threaten on an artifact. So it grabs a creature for a turn. The other bits are gravy. This is the kind of card that we see in most sets. And it is on par with the other threatens in other sets. The other threatens in other sets, threaten is gain control of target creature until end of turn. And in some sets, threaten is a great, almost first pickable card. And in some sets, they can give it 3 extra effects and it's still not going to be good enough. There are 3 ways, and only 3 ways, to sacrifice creatures in this set. They are mostly uncommon. So I'm not going to be taking this card very high. However, it's really good removal if you have those sack outlets. So I'm not gonna take it high. They're mostly red. But like there's a black one that's 3 mana. That one's really tough because it's 4 mana to play the apple, and then there's 2 1 mana sacrifice. You already have those sack outlets. Go ahead and grab the apple. There aren't a lot of decks that are quite aggressive enough to make this card worth it inherently, but it is a playable card in this set. That's true, Ranger, but you don't care in a lot of color. This is just as an aside for the area it's tempting apple and threaten in this set. There are fewer creatures that are relevant other than their size. So in a lot of sets lately, like March the Machine, for example, creatures would have lines of text or bonus abilities when they came into play that made them relevant for you to keep track of the whole. This set, things like comes into play abilities or sacrifice abilities to do a thing, tend to be adventures, which means that once the creature's down, it's just sized at that size. That's another thing that makes this card a little bit weaker. However, there are still just keyword large creatures. So yeah, it's not unplayable, but you need other cards first. Up next, Ginger Brute. There's a classic. I think Ginger Brute was a 4 or a 5 in the original Eldraine. In this set, it's a lot weaker because aggro in general is a little bit weaker. Aggressive decks are going to have a difficult time here. It is essentially unblockable, but there are fewer auras that combo with it. However, there are auras at rare that combo with the Ginger that you really want. There's like at uncommon we have like Dragon Mantle and Knightly Valor. And there's a 2 mana +2/+2 in green that recurs. Like you can build around the Ginger Brute, but there are rares that make Ginger Brute so good. But it's usually going to play at that floor of a 2, so you don't want it except in the most aggressive decks unless you have the cards that combo with it. Rolls don't quite do enough. Like they are relevant. However, the young hero roll on a Ginger Brute, if you can get that up to a 4/4, then it's really good. But you want the young hero rolls before the Ginger Brute. So like, it's the score here is an order of operations. You need the cards that make the rolls are more important to your Ginger Brute deck than the Ginger Brute. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give it a revisit note because I might be wrong on that one. This is the first one that like maybe it is just good enough to take Ginger Brutes early aggressively and grab all the young hero rolls, because looking through this set, there weren't a lot of places where the young hero rolls were any good. This is the first one. Cuteness is not a factor. There are so many cards with fantastic art, dog. If I gave every card with fantastic art a high score, I'd give so many cards a high score. Magic art's just that good. Prophetic Prism. Prophetic Prism is great in this set. So I gave it a 5, which might be the highest score I've ever given Prophetic Prism, because I've rated this card like 4 other times, or cards very similar to it. But I gave it a 5, and that's because it triggers Celebration, and it replaces itself, and it lets you splash those off-color auras. So if I am a mono blue deck with a Frolicking Familiar, then I'm fine with that and just putting a Prophetic Prism. It's pretty good in this set. Like, you can take it high, you can take it out of a dead pack, not be that with it. And also Bargain, exactly, Tyrant. It triggers Bargain, it triggers Celebration, and it aids all of your adventures. Alright, up next, Scarecrow Guide. 2 mana, 2/1 with Reach. It's fine. Bad fixing, you'd rather have a Prophetic Prism, but it does its job. Cool card though. You're doing a splendid job, my noble. Not a single bird has attacked us. Soul Guide Lantern is good for a lot of the reasons Prophetic Prism is, but I think that the fact that you have to sacrifice it to draw a card means you can't bargain it. I'm actually lowering the score by 1. We're going to lower the score to a 3 and lower the ceiling to a 5 because you can't bargain it and draw a card. But it's still pretty good. It still triggers Celebration. It is a little cheaper to cast, and there are 8 things that recur from the graveyard in this. Soul Guide Lantern is worth picking up for a sideboard slot. I'm raising it back up to a 4. Alright, because it's good enough to pick up early and just side in, because when you want it, you really want it. But the fact that it doesn't work with bargain is irrelevant. Up next, 3 Bowls of Porridge. I gave it a 3 with a floor of 2, healing of 5. This card is actively difficult to play with, which is cool. Ideally, you want to deal the 2 damage and tap a creature, then bargain it away. And it is a food, which is relevant to lots of, like in the food deck. I gave it a ceiling of a 5 because you can play it in the food deck with your Greta Sweet Tooth Scourge, and you can bargain it away. So it's fine, it's playable. You want some other synergies for it because you don't want to be committed doing all 3 abilities before this card is worth it. Because 8 mana to deal 2 damage to a creature, tap a creature, gain 3 life is a lot, but 4 mana to deal 2 damage to a creature is fine, and the options are nice. It's not unplayable, just not a high pick. Alright, I need to let my pup out of this room really quick. 1 sec. And we'll continue on to lands. Alright, I'm back. Hey, Dragon Jack. Okay, what's next? Okay, land. So Crystal Grotto is a reprint from Dominaria United, and it's not quite as good as it was in that set. Well, it was also awkward in that set, so who but try 1 on a land is really pretty cool, and you can filter your mana. It's good for a lot of the same reasons Prophetic Prism is, and it's free for a lot of the same reasons. You do have to think about putting it into your deck, but not too hard. It's going to fit into most 2-color decks that run at least 17 lands. Scry 1 on a land is valuable because it's about half a card. I think it's about half a card. At the later stages in the game, that's a big copy. But the filtering is actually nice and relevant, so you can cast your off-color adventures. And there are good cards to splash. There are build-around cards in this. I like the Crystal Grotto. I gave it a 3 with a floor of a 3. It's usually going to play at the 3. If you have a lot of off-color adventures in your white deck, or a lot of frolicking familiars in your blue deck, card's solid. But otherwise, don't worry too much. Up next, Edgewall Inn. This is the best Evolving Wilds we've ever seen. Oops. Alright, so there we go. That would. Alright, Edgewall Inn. This is Evolving Wilds. But it's an Evolving Wilds that you don't actually have to have that land in your deck. I mean, I can name red even without a mountain in my deck. Or I can name blue even without an island in my deck. And unlike a lot of the other adventure-centric cards, this card's still worth playing with like 2-3 adventures in the deck. Even if I have no adventures in the deck, I will still probably play the Edgewall Inn. I will take this first often because it's fixing that draws me a card later in the game. Card's just good. Yeah, this I think it is the best Evolving Wilds we've seen at take it really high. It's really strong. Yeah, I gave it a 6. The floor of a 4 is if you have 0 adventures in it. You will likely have a couple adventures in the deck, and you will get to draw 1 card that you don't really get to choose. 7 if you have a few different adventures you can choose from. So good. Alright, last land is Evolving Wilds. We see this card a lot. It's fixing. You play it if you have 2 colors. You might not play it in a monocolored aggro deck, but generally you're going to be very happy to have a copy or 2. Floor of 4, ceiling of 4, 0 effort required, or average. All right, so that is it for all of the lands, artifacts, and multicolored. I'll get these up into possible. We're going to cover white cards tonight. And I will come back on Wednesday to cover the other 4 colors. I will, if you are interested in the other 4 colors, do be sure to check out the beginning bit, because it is tough for me to go through all of the stats every time to do another color. So there are going to be 2 more parts to the set review. I'll talk about it in a minute. Next part is going to be missed a card. That's okay. You can I'll show you how I cards. Looks like I missed the last 2 cards of the set. I did that. All right, here we are with the white. Up first we have Archon's Glory. This is a very cool bargain card. 2 mana for +2/+2 is often playable, and if we go back to our stats, we can see that +2/+2 lets us dodge for 5 potential remove based on the size of our creature. The flying and lifelink are nice and tend to be an emergency button. You will use it to close out a game, just deal the last few points of damage, or jump a creature into the air to get a block in. Generally speaking, this card is going to be a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-2, because you have to bargain something away. So ideally, you have a deck that is good at putting out extra things to bargain for when you need to make this a 2. Cool card all around. I really like Archon's Glory. I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3, ceiling of 5, effort low. That is higher than usual for a combat trick. That's just what. That's because of it's a lot like Aerial Boost because it's only 1 mana. It's a little bit like Aerial Boost out of March of the Machine. It lets you finish off a creature, finish off a player, protect a creature. And the bargain is a nice little bit of extra. I'm taking it higher than I would normally take 1 mana trick. Armory Mice. This card's super cool. It's not that good, but a 2 mana 3/1. So that's a static celebration trigger. Doesn't use the stack. As long as 2 non-land permanents were in play, this is a 3. So no, it's probably still just a 2. 1 toughness is such a liability in this format. It can't block other rats, and it's easy to ping. Like how in the last format, Lord of the Rings, we had Fear Fire Foes that made 1 toughness creatures just worse. But this is a cool card because it is a 2 mana 3/1 that can attack. I'm raising this because you can attack this into a 2/2. Your opponent can't block it. A 2/2 doesn't trade with the Armory, or even if you have nothing in your hand, you can still attack your Armory Mice into your opponent. Because what if you make a food at instant speed and just eat it? We're giving this a revisit because I need to go back. This is why my set review took so long, is because I kept running into cards like this. What I need to do is go back and see how many 2/2s and 2/3s are actually playing in this set. Because if the 2/2s and 2/3s are good in this set, Armory Mice is a 3. And if the 2/2s, if it's more 3/3s and 1/1s, Armory Mice is just a. So yeah, we're revisiting this. But this is the kind of celebration I like. Because the threat of activation of celebration is more valuable than celebration. 1 toughness is a liability, and I need to figure out exactly how. There are a lot more 3s and medium to high build around grades than higher complexity. Alright, up next we have Besotted Knight. It's a cool card in general. This is a 5 mana for 4/4 worth of pay 1 to put a roll on something, and then 4 mana 3/3. And neither half is great, but combined it's a solid card. It's usually going to play near that floor of a 3, but if you have a lot of cards that care about having sorceries or adventures, or auras, it goes up to a 5. I'm not going to be taking this early, but most white decks most white black decks and most white blue decks will be very happy to have the Besotted Knight. Also, lovely card. Like, look at it. Look at this guy. Not judgment. No, 0 judgment from Besotted Knight. Break the Spell. This is another card that I came back on a lot. If this were just destroy target enchantment, if it were just to mystify, then chances are you would be okay playing this. But There are 32 cards that this hits, plus 29 rolls. If your opponent attacks their 3/3 monstrous, their 4/4 Besotted Knight, with their 4/4 Royal Besotted Knight, your 4/4, and you get to break the spell to destroy the roll and draw a card and win the combat, then this card is going to be so good. You will sometimes have to cycle this on your own creature's roll, just because, but sometimes you're going to break a curse or a real aura on your own creature. Yes, there is a cursed roll. There are a lot of good uses for this card. I came up so many times on this. I started it at a 2, and it just does so much work in this set. There are enough good enchantments to kill that I'm usually pretty happy killing it. And like, it combos with hatching plans. Like, you can break your own hatching plans to draw 4 cards. Very cool. There's a lot you can do with it. Yep. Yeah, every single pack has a target for this card. Very strong in this set. I gave it a 4 with a floor of a 2 because you're not always going to have targets. Like, this has diminishing returns on it. You want, the second one is worse than the first, the third one is worse than the second, and so on. But it combos with a lot of different cards that we're going to be. There will be a lot of targets. All right, Charmed Clothier. Clothier? Clothier? Clother? Someone needs to tell me how to pronounce this. I will take Hatching Plans way too often as well, Tyrant. I'm really excited. Hatching Plans is one of my favorite Magic cards. I have so many copies of that card. All right, so this is 5 mana, so it has to be another target creature, and this is 5 mana for a 4 flying power worth of stats, but it can't put the roll on itself. Actually, lowering this to a 3. Lowering a lot of these. It's usually going to play like a 3, because you'll usually have another creature that can wield the roll. But it's a little more work than a 5 mana 4/4 flying finisher. 5 mana 3/3 flyers is a 5 mana 3/3 flyer is not bad in this set, but there are some good counters to it and good ways to kill it, because it can't wield the roll itself. It should have been allowed to wield the roll itself, and like it would be on par with the other cards in the set. Not a huge fan of it. There are better 5-drops, but you will end up playing it. You want it more when you care about the rolls. I don't like these cards. So like this Besotted Knight, right? You can play another creature and then betroth the beast in the same turn. Or you can betroth the beast and then cast it in the same turn. It's not the end of the world if you just play it as a 4 mana 3/3. The Clothier, that might be it. That's I talked myself up on this because it is in relation to this Clothier. It's good if you have other creatures to put on it, but it doesn't combo with other rolls. It doesn't combo with itself. It is one of the weaker, but still interesting. You need to have another creature that, like, for this card to be good, you need to have another creature to wield the roll, and that creature needs to not already have the roll on it. It's kind of weak as a flyer, and even if you have, it's a 4 if you have a bunch of other cards that care about aura. It is a Fae, but blue and black, most of the cards that care about a creature being a fairy are both blue and black, or only really go in the blue and black deck. Like, it's not unplayable, but it's not great. I gave it a 3. Hey, Grommet. Oh, it's because I'm leaning down. One sec. Let me fix that. And thank you. Yeah, when I lean down to look at cards too closely, it does that. You can't see it, but I have a ton of windows and slides open. It is only 1 pit. All right, Cheeky House Mouse. This card will be revisited upon the rares, because what this card does is, like, a 1 mana 2/1 is not great in this set because, like, not inherently. It is not inherently good. It needs to do something else, and for some reason they gave it an adventure that wasn't a roll. Like, it doesn't put a roll on anything. Like, it could have said target creature is royal and can't be blocked this turn by powers 3 or greater. But overall, a 1 mana 2/1 is not good enough. And it's good if you have ways to celebrate, or if there were more ways to draw cards with it. Like, if you could find a way, so like in the original set, there was a very similar card, 1 mana 1/1 with flying, that was fantastic because of all the different cards that cloned adventures. Yeah, being a sorcery makes, like, if this were an instant, it would be really good. But we're just at the point where Savannah Lions isn't good enough. Nothing cares about it being a mouse. Triggering the celebration is relevant. So like it's not totally unplayable, but it's a lot more work than it's worth. So even if this does have, so I suspect that there are rares that make this card strong, but that is also something that warrants a high effort value. It requires rares. It is cool though. It's stealing this ring. All right, up next we have Cooped Up. Premier removal in this set. Better, we've seen effects like this before. It's a pacifism that lets you actually take out the creature later, but it's really cool in this set because you can take out the creature. Though there are lots of cool ways to use this card. It is good removal at 2 mana to deal with anything. You can take it out even if it's got a strong ability and exiled. You can put this ability on the stack. So you can have the exile enchanted creature ability on the stack and then bargain it away. So like if your opponent, like there's counter targets, there's one that's a cancel, and if you bargain something, it's only 2 mana. Well, if your opponent casts a spell, you can respond by exiling the enchanted creature and then bargaining away with the ability. You can activate the ability and return this card to your hand to recast it. Once the exiled creature dies, this is sacrifice, so all the cards that care about enchanted creatures going to the graveyard is really good. This is one of the best pacifisms we've ever seen, both contextually and in general, like on its own merit. Very good all around. One sec, my pup is demanding to be let into this room. I'm back. But yeah, Cooped Up is premier removal. It might end up being, I think it's even. Like, you take this really high. I do think it's the best white comp. So yes, I'm giving it a 6. All right, up next we have Curse Courtier. Curse Courtier. Courtier. It's gonna happen a lot, Marge. Like, it's gonna happen all the time. There's so many. I mean, even if you're just like, you can activate it in an Archon's Glory. Like, there are cheap enough ways to bargain it away at instant speed in every color. Not every color. White, black, and blue. Right, exactly, thing. You can do that, dog. There's good fixing at common and uncommon. All right, Curse Courtier. This card is so cool. So it's a 3-mana 3/3 lifelinker that comes in Curse. And that might be, and like now it's like, oh, I have to deal with this curse roll. But there are ways to deal with the curse roll that are positive. Like, this is going to be a boon as often as it is going to be a problem. Because if you can give it any other roll, then the curse roll token goes away. Or if you can bargain away the curse roll and be very happy with it. Yeah, a 3-mana 3/3 lifelink is good. The trick with Curse Courtier is going to be turning the curse on it into a boon rather than a penalty. I think this card is quite strong, and there's a lot of different things to do with it. I don't think it needs to survive a turn all that often. Like, you have to build around it. I should probably lower the floor. Or probably like a 2. Because the floor is just a 3-mana 1/1. I mean, a 3-mana 1/1 with lifelink even has a place. Like, it still has lifelink with it. But like, if you have enough break the spells, then now you have a 3-mana 3/3 that you attacked and they blocked, and you get to eat their creature, and it's not cursed anymore. There's just there are 29 ways at common and uncommon to put a new roll on the Curse Courtier. It's so, in this set specifically, there are so many ways to break the curse. Very strong. I gave it like, the floor is a 2, but it's gonna play closer to that ceiling of a 5 or a 6. But it is work. You have to put work into making this card good. There are also cards that care about you gaining 3 life specifically. The 3/3 lifelink, yeah, there's so many different ways to break the curse. This is such a cool card because, like, you could show this to somebody out of the context of the set and be like, they'd be like, This is awful. How could you print this card? But within the context of the set, it's awesome. There's so many cool ways to use the roll for value rather than just breaking the curse. Your worst case scenario, just breaking the curse, putting another roll on it. Now you have 4/4 lifelink with trample or ward. But yeah, the best case scenario is you have a 3-mana 3 with a relevant rectangle attached. Discerning Financier. This was another card that I spent some time on. Your opponent does have to have more lands than you. But selling someone treasures is really good. There's a lot of good ways to generate treasures in this format. Yeah, you just sell them a treasure and draw a card. Back. I need to know. I need to know if there's a way to break the treasure. Draw the card. Q-back is. Ask about that. But yeah, Discerning Financier, very cool. On the play, you're going to be okay. On the draw, this will almost always work. Like, it seems like it would be hard. I mean, if you've ever played with land tax, you might think, oh, it is difficult for me to turn this on. But if you're on the draw, if you're on the play, you're probably already ahead. And if you're on the draw, or if your opponent is struggling on lands, you're probably going to win the game off of this. Very strong. Right. Yeah, but like, no, I don't think there's any way to take it. Very strong white card takes advantage. Like, it turns being the draw on the draw into an. I like about it. All right, group hug all-star for sure, dog. All right, Dutiful Griffin. 5 mana 4/4 flyer is pretty good. If you build around it, then this is a respectable finisher. Like, if you have 2 cursed couriers, you can sacrifice 2 curses to return Griffin to your hand. There's not, this is another card I went back a few times on. There's not a ton of ways to permanently deal with this. There are not enough good. The cards that exile tend to also deal 3 damage. So, like, there is one really good way to deal with it that we looked at common. Yep. But otherwise, it is hard to permanently get rid of the Griffin as long as you build around having it recur. Strong card, good finisher. White wants as many copies as they can get, really. One of the better white uncommon. I am going to raise the effort to medium, but I'm happy with all the score. You have to have a critical mass of enchantments in your deck for it to be 8, but that floor of a 5 where it recurs once, very likely lowering the floor a little. Just a 5 mana 4/4 flyer. Have enough. Eerie Interference. This card is hard to play with. Mainly, we've had sets where this card would be nuts. The problem is, in this set, if you let your opponent attack you with enough creatures, you're probably going to lose. There's attack trick. Yes, exactly, Ty. That's why I gave it such a high score. That's why I gave the Griffin such a. But the Eerie Interference is uniquely tough in this set because of how many things trigger on attack and how hard it is to put up a huge set of creatures to block with. With some work, you can get 2 or 3 cards out of it. You just need your opponent to attack with enough creatures that you multi-block with a bunch of creatures. And Fog has a place. Fog is not always good. It's not inherently good. But you can build around Fog and give it a place. And enough card draw that Eerie Interference becomes playable in the right deck. I gave it a ceiling of a 5. But don't take it by default. Floor is a 1. The card that is some work to play. Alright, up next, Footbridge Guard. Oops. It's a 2 mana 2/2 that taps. That's a significant investment to tap a creature. So it is really very good. The blue-white decks that care about a creature being, like, if you have the 4 mana 2/3, whenever your creature becomes tapped, this card instantly jumps floor of a 3 to a 5, but it's hard to untap with both. It's part of an engine. Great card in general. I like 2 mana 2/2s that pull their weight in the late game, but at the end of the day, it is usually a 2 mana 2/2. So I just gave it a 3, floor of a 3. I like that. Floor, ceiling of 5. I should raise. I'm gonna raise the effort on this card because it's usually gonna play at that 3. But with the right cards in the right deck. That's a lot of effort. That ceiling jumps up. Gallant Pie Wielder. Now, this is one of the creatures that gets a lot out of Celebration. I gave it a 4 because a 3-mana 2/3 with First Strike is pretty good, even if it only hits for 4 once in a game. You're in a dedicated Celebration deck that can turn it on an instant. It is much, much stronger, but the threat of activation is there. So if you have the Gallant Pie Wielder and your opponent has a 4/4, you can still attack the Gallant Pie Wielder into that 4/4 because if you make a food at instant speed, trade. However, it will only trade, so not a perfect attack. This card would be better if there were more X2s. If there were more 3/1s and 4/2s that people were playing, this card would be a little bit better. But contextually within the set, it doesn't flat I gave it a floor of 4, and it's play at that floor of a 4. The ceiling is a 6 because a dedicated Celebrate deck that gives roll, man, doesn't hit pretty hard. Or like Gallant Pie Wielder into where are I? Sir Armand. So Gallant Pie Wielder with Sir Armand, you can put the monster roll onto the Pie Wielder. It triggers it all at once with one card because it puts 2 permanents into it. And now you have a 4/3 double strike that attacks for 8 with Trample. So like, there are cards that make this card really good. It's just a little bit of work. I like the card a lot, making it pretty high for white. Glass Casket, just very efficient removal in this set. It's harder to kill than in the last Eldraine, but it can still be killed. I raised the score a little bit because it kills nearly 70% of the creatures in this set, including all of the tokens, and is a little bit less fragile than it was last Eldraine. Cards that would normally kill artifacts or enchantments only kill enchantments. And then we've got Grasp of Fate. Actually, no, Grasp of Fate. Lower to a 5 because enchantment is something of a liability. But this is just Oblivion Ring. Solid card. It dies to for enchantments. It dies to other Oblivion Rings. But no, but it's just a solid removal. Very efficient. Piles. God, right. Up next we have Griffin Airy. This card is the best it's ever been. It is a 2-mana enchantment, so it triggers all of your enchantments in it. It makes bigger flying tokens than anything else. All the other things that make flying tokens only make 1/1s. And every food you have turns on the Griffin Airy. So, just makes your food great. It is a build around. You gotta build around it, but like, I'll first pick Griffin Airy all the time in this. Just because so many, like, it's so easy to first pick a Griffin Airy. Like, in the other sets, last time we saw Griffin Airy, for instance, you would first pick it because it's a great engine when you could get it done. And trying to find a 3/3 lifelinker or like a revitalize was so difficult. But if you first pick Griffin Airy, you will have so many chances to grab food over the course of that draft. Yes, I think this card is first pickable. Because like, it's a 6 on average, but if I first pick it, I can get it up. Like, most cards that have a ceiling of an 8 have a high effort value. But I gave this one a ceiling of an 8 with a medium effort value because if I, like, let's say I first pick a Griffin Airy and somebody at the other side of the table also first picks a Griffin Airy because they just want to play with it. Well, in the last time that happened, I think it was M13, M14, that was a disaster because you would only have a few other ways to do it. But there, you can both first pick Griffin Airy and then have enough food for both of you to reliably trigger the Griffin. And the food is good enough in this set, the cards that make the food are good enough in this set, that even if you don't end up with a Griffin Airy, you're still happy to use the food for others. So yes, the card is very good in this set. Sithic's food would be... Yeah, Griffin Airy with food is so good. Up next, we've got Hopeful Vigil. So this card is a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance. And you can sacrifice it to scry 2 later. The floor of that is a 3. That floor of a 3 is if you don't care about any of the extra effects of this card. What this card does is be a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance. That is a token, which is relevant to all your token synergy. It is a permanent for Bargain that sits in play. It is a permanent that you can sacrifice to draw a card to cycle your Break the Spell. Like, sometimes you're just going to sacrifice it to scry 2, and that's fine. But having the extra rectangle for only 2 mana is very strong in this set. Even if you don't have the extra rectangle to bargain away, being able to sacrifice it to scry 2 and trigger your cards that care about enchantments dying is. This card is better than it looks on the surface by a wide margin. I gave it a floor of a 3, and that's if it's a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance that you can pay 3 to scry away later. It's usually going to play much closer to that feeling of a 6. That 4 is most normal, and it's usually going to play at a 4 because you care about enchantments dying. But yeah, a 2-mana 2/2 that gives you something extra to bargain away is great, and both halves can be bargained. And it triggers Celebration by itself for 2. It works with everything in it. One of the premier white commons. Speaking of which, up next we have Intangible Virtue. I gave it a very... I rated them separately. But yeah, I gave it the same exact rating as the Griffinary because it's good in pretty much the same exact situation for the same exact reason. Like, instead of grabbing food if you first pick the Intangible Virtue, you grab tokens. But there are enough tokens in this set that is very good. And there are a lot of cards that make multiple tokens. Don't underestimate how valuable the Vigilance is. Every color has creature tokens and artifact tokens that it makes well. Like late in the draft, if you don't have tokens, you're going to have to pass Intangible. But it's worth a first pick quite often. And it's best in white-black or red-white, but it has game everywhere. This card was an overperformer in Innistrad when we first saw it, and an over Master sets where it was reprinted. Going to perform very well here. What do you mean by unavailable, George? Like, do you mean difficult to draft, or... So, earlier we talked about the stats on the slot. There's only... a 6... It's usually going to be an uncommon. Unbalanced. So, the mythic rares, the 7% chance of a mythic rare enchanting is going to ruin some drafts. But most of them are fine. Like, Necropotence seems busted, but triple black is difficult in this. And, like, no one's going to grab Omniscience. So, if somebody plays a Bitter Blossom against you on turn 2, well, that sucks. That's not different from other sets. Generally speaking, the rares have been more creative and build-aroundy than backbreakingly powerful. So, like, I love this. Like, look at the uncommons we've seen so far. We've got Griffinary, got Intangible Virtue. We've got Utopia Sprawl. We have Hatching Plan. They're not back-breaking, busted cards. They are fascinating build-arounds. Or efficient removal spells. So, like, I don't know about all of the rare and mythics. I haven't seen them all yet. But generally speaking, the ones that we have here in white are all very reasonable and more interesting, terrifying. Like, I am not mad that Griffinary is in this set. I am ecstatic to see. Alright, up next we have Kellen's Lightblade. Efficient removal, the option is nice. Generally speaking, these cards, these combat trick instances that deal damage attacking or blocking creatures, tend to be a little bit weak. But the bargain ability on this means that it scales well into the lane. They do have to attack. You'll be able to play around it, but it's fairly efficient removal at any stage of the game. And I wanted to talk about it when we did Cooped Up, because, like, they're a nice little combo, because, like, you can exile it in combat. Like, you can wait until you're in combat and then activate the Cooped Up and bargain it away, the ability on the stack. So cool. I'm really loving it. Yep, white, destroy. Destroy that creature. Okay, so about halfway through the white card. Knightly Valor. This card was a very strong card in Return to Ravnica. But, like, you have to be careful in how you play it. A 5-mana 4/4 is what it ends up being. But it's a 5-mana 4/4 spread across 2 permanents, which means it's Celebration. You can bargain away the Knightly Valor itself and still Knight. And it's solid. I gave it a medium effort value. It's better in, like, the Enchantress decks, the cards that care about having Enchantress die. But it's pretty good in general. And You have to be really careful because if your opponent has a removal spell in response to you playing this card, it's backbreaking. If it doesn't resolve, you don't get the knight. So generally speaking, auras tend to be weaker because auras let your opponent 2-for-1 you. They let your opponent kill your creature in response or after your aura's down, and then they get to take out 2 cards. Knightly Valor solves that problem by giving you a 2/2 knight as well. The problem is they can kill it while the spell is in the stack, and you won't get either. You have to think when you play Knightly Valor, but it's a solid 5 mana card. It would be higher if there weren't other 5 mana spells that I'm happy to play, but I am not like this. Fine, it's good. 3 floor of 3, 5 effort. Up next, we have Knight of Doves. This is a card I'm so excited to play with. This is a build around. So I've been saying a lot, oh, we have these things that trigger when enchantments die. We have these things that care about tokens. Well, this is all of those. Making 1 white birds is great. Triggering your celebration at instant speed, great. Making a bird to block because you were able to bargain something away at instant speed. Activating Cooped Up to exile the creature it's attached to and make a bird is great. If this card makes 1 bird, you're happy. If this card makes 6 birds, you're gonna win the game. I don't think it's unreasonable to compare it to the Defender Lord from Dominaria United. That makes a bird for each defender creature. But it triggers on rolls, it triggers on auras, it triggers on Cooped Up, it triggers removal. You will make a lot of birds with the Knight of Doves. Also, look at this guy. Like, the man who dedicated his life being a knight and doves. I have to respect. It's a great card. So I gave it a floor of 4, but the on this card is 8 because the ceiling wins you the game. I gave it a high effort value because you have to build around it and you have to think about it. But the floor of 4 is with not a lot of effort. That's 1 bird. So the effort value is high, but it's not a high effort to get it from a 2 to a 3. It's a high effort to get it from a 4 to an 8. Bargain Skin Veil. All right, Moment of Valor. This is fine removal. It's not the removal you want. It doesn't kill that many creatures. Only 17% of creatures with power 4 or greater. Sometimes you will end up giving your opponent a roll to use the Moment of Valor on it. And it's not that this is a bad card, because the ability to also give something indestructible is a good trick. Like, both of these are a little bit overcosted, but neither of them are that bad. I gave it a 3 because there's just better removal in white. But you'll often end up playing this and not being too solid trick. 3 is a lot for a trick that does this effect, like that just saves a creature. But the option is really pretty. All right, Moment of Valor. Up next, we have Plunge into Winter. 2 mana, tap a creature, scry 1, draw a card. There's a lot of synergies with this card. There's a lot of cards that care about having your creature tapped. But scry 1, draw a card for 2 mana is almost worth it. And like we've seen this effect be good in others. 2 mana to disable a blocker or an attacker and replace itself is quite strong, even without a ton of synergy. Just some work. Blue-white spells. Like, blue-white wants this card because it cares about spells, and it cares about spells, cares about tapping the creatures, but you want to get extra synergy out of this card. I wouldn't run it in a lot of the red-white or black-white. Just better things to be. I did give it a 4 with a floor of 3 and 5 because your worst case scenario is this cantrips and deals with and it's better than a cantrip. Try to. Cool card. Next, Protected Parents. Dies to put a young hero roll on something. The problem with this card is getting it to die. You can't bargain away a creature unless it's also a token. And you have to get this to die in a situation where you then have attacks. It's more work than you would think. This is a good card if you care about rolls and auras specifically, less than if you care about being a young hero. But I was thinking about this card earlier when Thane said, what about rolls on Gingerbrute? Like, Gingerbrute, Protected Parents, very good. It's some work, but I think you can build a solid deck around it. So I am going to raise the ceiling to a 5. But no, it's not a premier high pick. Just does its job. Return Triumphant. I don't like this card that much because you need to already have something in your graveyard. The young hero roll is just fine. But again, it's very good with Gingerbrute because you can play it on turn 1 and then return your Gingerbrute Triumphant. Um, it's not easy it's not as easy in other set. Like, if you could always play this on 2 mana, you'd be pretty happy. There's no cycle of creatures that mill 3, so this is very similar to Recommission out of Brothers War, and Recommission was solid. But that's because there are lots of ways to loot creatures away or get creatures. This way, in this set, you mostly need your creature to die naturally, have it return. It makes it a little bit weaker than usual. It's playable, but you're limited on how many you can roll. And it's gonna lower the score. It's actually better if you have a lot of like, if you have powerful 3 mana rares to return, it's solid. But I haven't. The only card that I'm really happy to return consistently right now that I've seen is Gingerbread. Yeah, because even like if you return a protective pair, you don't get anything out of the second young hero. There is a red 2/1 that you can sacrifice to put a young hero roll on something. Oh, there. Mostly this card's kind of weak in that unless you have rares worth getting back, which is effort. Alright, up next, Rhyme for a Rider. I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3, healing of 6. Dedicated enchantment deck, if you're making enchantments at instant speed, or if you're natural deaths are more common than artificial deaths. Sorry, but neither are that common. Rhyme for Reindeer, 4 mana, 3/4. You need a lot of enchantments for this to be good, and then it's really good. So, floor of 3, ceiling of 6, average of 4, medium effort. You put this into a dedicated enchantment deck, you'll be pretty happy. You ideally want it to be a blue-white enchantment deck, which is some work to get together. But it's very good in that deck, and there are not a lot of other 4s to replace it, other than your Signpost uncommon. But like, I'll be very happy to play this, make some rolls at instant speed on my opponent's turn to lock out their creatures, and then make more rolls on my turn to lock down their creatures. Cool card, very well designed. All right, up next, Savior of the Sleeping. This is one of the best cards that cares about enchantment stuff. Vigilance is a relevant mechanic in this set. I gave it a floor of 3 with a ceiling of 6, but it's usually going to play like that 5 because if you play it and then one enchantment dies, then you will have a 3/4 on your. But in this set, the threat of activation is incredibly valuable. Because if you have a 3/3 and I have a 2/3 with a roll on a different creature, and I attack with my Savior of the Sleeping, you block my Savior of the Sleep. All I have to do is bargain one spell away, or get one enchantment to die, or break the spell on my own curse. And this will grow to a 3/4. And a 3 and a 3/4 Vigilance is really good. 3 and 2/3 Vigilance is kind of in this format. But that threat of activation, that even if you don't have another enchantment, even if you don't put the counter on it, having another of your enchantments in play is enough to make this card better than it looks. It's going to play very well in that deck. Up next, we have the best white uncommon. Alright, at worst, this is a 2 mana 2/2 that gets +2/+2 when it comes. Like, it's a 2 mana 2/2 that with haste. It gives something else +2/+2. It enables an attack you wouldn't otherwise have. But this Cleave Shadows is really important in this format. Being able to wipe your opponent's rats is so strong. There's so many random 1 toughness creatures that are just worth killing, worth expending effort to kill. Even just disabling an attack, like what this card does. Where'd it go? What the Shepherd does is always enable an attack. Sometimes it'll enable 2 attacks. So like if you have a 3/3 and your opponent has a 3, you don't have to play both halves in one turn. You can Cleave Shadows to get everything -1/-1, attack with your 3. Then you can pass it the next turn, attack with your 5/5. This is the most efficient 2-drop, and both halves are important. This is a reason to run Prophetic Prism or Evolving Wilds with 1 Swamp. You should be scared of your opponent's rats or fairies or doves. This is the only card I've seen so far that clears them out cleanly, while being a relevant body when you don't need it to. Like in the last set in Lord of the Rings, Black Breath would give all creatures -1/-1, and I would frequently run that just knowing that I would have to loot it away a lot of the time, because otherwise just losing to 4/1/1s with Rally the Ancestors would happen too often. Great card, beware, both halves are relevant. Alright, up next we have Slumbering Keep Guard, 1 mana, 1/1. that is really good in the late game, you'll probably get a lot of value out of this card. I gave it a 4 with a floor of 3. You want it in a deck with lots of enchantments. Again, that threat of activation is really important. This is not once per turn, which means if you have 5 enchantments in play and 6 mana, you're attacking with an 11/11. I compare it to like the Wandering Root Wall. It is fragile. It's not a free card to play with. But a 1 mana 1/1 that scries a few times over the course of the game and then gets to be your finisher in the late game is very good. This is an Enchantress staple. Like, you have to be Enchantress for this card to be good, and then it's very... Alright, up next we have Solitary Sanctuary. This is the white uncommon payoff. This is the white uncommon payoff for tapping creatures. If you have no other cards in your deck that tap creatures down, this is a 3 mana enchantment that stuns a creature and puts a counter on a creature you control and then sticks it around. Bargain. However, if you have the tap deck, this is going to play like Luminarch Aspirant. And this doesn't trigger once per turn. If you tap 3 of your opponent's creatures, you get 3 counters. It enables an attack the turn it comes in, and it enables more attacks throughout the game. It also makes it like your opponent can, if you have a bunch of 2/2s, then our friend Ice Mane, Frostbridge Guard, your opponent suddenly can't block any of your 2/2 because you just tap it and put a counter on an instant. Every time you tap, if you're at a board stall where you're tapping your opponent's flyer down every turn, you're also growing your team. This is another card that I will first pick and build around, and if I receive it late, that is going to be... The Solitary Sanctuary is a signal that the white-blue tap deck is open, and unlike some of the other tap cards, it doesn't need to be both white and blue. The card is good in just the mono-white deck. Very efficient, tempo-oriented play. Hard to beat. I gave it a 7 with a floor feeling of 8 effort. Up next, Stockpiling Celebrant. 3 mana, 3/2. There are a lot of good cards to pick up in this form. I gave it a 3, but if you have the permanents to pick up, then it's really good. If you pick up an adventure creature, it's really good. If you pick up something, tap something when it comes into play, it's really strong. You can't flash it in, but like there are creatures worth freeing. There are creatures worth picking up. There are adventures worth recasting. It's very good. Good. This is a good staple. I'm actually raising it up to a 4 because of how many cards I've seen that gave it the rating that make me want to put it into my deck anyway. This is just a human. Like, I've done this. I've stockpiled chicken from a restaurant. Just taking home the food. All right, up next. Oh, it also is good for resetting Celebration. There's a lot of... You need to build around it, but the deck that wants to pick up its permanents will be very happy to have it. Stroke of Midnight. I'm torn on this one. It does so many things, and it kills anything. So, like, if you look at let's look at so Ravenform out of Kaldheim. 3 mana, exile target creature or artifact. Its controller creates a 1/1 Raven. Was kind of weak. Like, you'd want it sometimes for big important threats, but it was very hard to treat that as a whole card because you were spending a card to deal with an opposing player's permanent. Sometimes you'd even Ravenform your Raven, but you were spending a card and they were gaining a Raven at all times. This is similar, but a ground human is easier to deal with. And being instant speed means you can get a card out of it. So, like, if you get to Stroke of Midnight your opponent's creature in response to their pump spell, well, you got to deal with 2 cards, even though you're giving them a 1/1. I think this card is going to play really well as a 3 mana answer anything, because the ability to take out a random artifact or enchantment is also incredibly strong. In a pinch, you can even destroy your own permanent to trigger Celebration or get a bargain away. I think this card is going to play better than it looks. I gave it a revisit rating, a revisit note, but it's got 4 with a floor of 3, ceiling of 6, medium effort because you have to think about how you're playing with it. But you're going to be pretty happy to have it most of the time. It's average in the aggressive decks because giving your opponent a blocker is never something you want to do. I mean, sometimes you have to anyway. But if you are a controlling or a mid-range deck, you're going to be happy to have the Stroke of Midnight. Is Ashiok? Is the red-white Ash... So this is Ash Party Crasher at the stroke of midnight. I need to know that story. Is Ash Party Crasher Ashiok? Yeah, exactly. Like giving your opponent something to bargain. Every rectangle is going to be relevant in this. So your opponent having a 1/1 human to bargain away or to put a roll on is not ideal, but it kills anything at instant speed. That's relevant. Like, this is a tougher card to evaluate. Don't jam it into your deck without thinking, but don't roll it out either. The Princess Takes Flight. This is a cool card. It takes a creature out of the way for 2 turns, but it's flexible. So if you give your creature, like, you can exile your own creature in order to get the into the battlefield effect, or take a cooped up or aura off of it, or you can take a blocker out. So like I gave it a 3 with a ceiling of 5 because it sacrifices itself. So if you have the Knight of Doves, it makes a 1/1. There's a lot of corner cases where this card is good, but it's not good for free. You have to. It has a setup cost. It has a cool setup cost. But also, you only return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. It doesn't exile until it leaves play, which means that if you Princess Takes Flight your opponent's creature and then break the spell, they don't get it back. So this is an incredibly flexible, versatile aura, and no, this work. This is a hard card to work with, but like you can take a creature, you can blink your own creature at risk of them breaking it. You can exile your opponent's creature permanently with a break spell, and +2/+2 and flying is a relevant attack. But it's also not free. I love the idea of taking out your opponent's creature and then breaking it. I think you might be right, Thane, but if her name is Ash and Ashiok is the main villain, then maybe she turns back into Ashiok at midnight. We don't know anything about Ashiok still. I want to know about Ashiok. Maybe Ashiok is Ash Partygoer by day. Like I just like it. I'm raising this because I don't like this card. Moonveil Guide, like, it's a 4-mana 3/3 flying lifelink. It's work to get the celebration going. Not that much work. Card's fine without being. You'll play it. You won't play it happily. 4-mana 3/3 flying lifelink. Card's just fine. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this card is going to play pretty average. If it wins, it's because you locked everything down. Alright. Unassuming Sage. So for some reason, these last 2 cards show up in my first slide. So we're going to rate these right now. I have not read these, and I don't understand how. Exactly. This is exactly right, March. Unassuming Sage. 2-mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you do. If you do, create a sorcerer roll attached to it. This is a kicker card. It's either a 2-mana 2/2 or a 4-mana 3/3. I like this card a lot. So, excuse me, play as a 3. But you can get it up to a 5 if you have a deck that cares about the rolls, about enchantments dying, about... I like flexible cards. Flexible cards are very strong. It's a cool card. I think it's going to do pretty well. You do need the sorcerer roll to be relevant. There's not a lot that makes a sorcerer roll. 4-mana 3/3 that scries on attack is... I would be better if it could attach sorcerer roll to anything, but I like also the cards that can trigger celebration by themselves while attacker on turn. Alright, Woodland Acolyte. This card's insane. So 3-mana 2/2 that draws a card is just really good. The Mend the Wilds to grab a relevant card on your opponent's step is great. And yeah, it's usually going to play pretty well. Okay. I like this card a lot. It is a green-white card that will either just be a 2/2 that replaces itself and blinks and lets you pick it up to recast it, and wields auras after having drawn you a card, but it also lets you set itself up really well. Like, you can use Mend the Wilds to grab a Stockpiling Celebrant and draw a card. Stockpiling Celebrant to scry 2, draw a card. But if you're feeling more aggressive, you can just grab a cheap Acolyte do like a 3 and 2 that draws a card is a card that every white deck will always be happy to play. The Mend the Wilds is for like Prophetic Prism. If you have a Prophetic Prism, then you can Mend the Wilds sometime. Whew. All right, we did it. That is everything for today. For the set review. Tomorrow, no stream. I'll put out a schedule tomorrow though if I can, and then tomorrow or Wednesday we are going to do the tomorrow or Wednesday is the part 2 of the set review. I'll do the other 4 sets. What I'd like to do is tomorrow do 2 sets, and then Wednesday do 2 sets or 2 colors. I'm not positive I'm going to have the time or the energy, but I will do my best, and I will know in the morning. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a schedule out for the week. This Thursday is early access. I'm going to be doing as many hours as I can, probably around 12 hours, of drafting this set to show you how this set plays. Testing out all the theories that I put forth in these set reviews. So I will see all of you then. For now, we're going to call it for the set review.